Tripo AI Ultra was just released, and it marks a huge step forward in 3D AI generation. In today's video, I will show you how you can use Tripo AI Ultra effectively to create highly detailed models from images in seconds. We will also explore how you can bake all the great details you achieve with Tripo Ultra onto a low poly mesh with much better topology in Blender. In addition to that, I will also show you how you can merge different body parts together in Blender to achieve even higher quality with your 3D AR models than with your base 3D generations. Having said that, let's dive right into it. Hey everyone, my name is Philip from Pixel Artistry and welcome back to the channel. In case you don't know me yet, I'm a professional 3D artist exploring the world of AI-powered 3D generation. And today we are going to have a detailed look at the new Tripo AI Ultra update. By the way, as always, if you would like to try Tripo AI yourself, you will find my invitation link down below in the video description. You might know this already from my previous videos where I collaborated with Tripo AI. Signing up will give you 500 extra credits on top of the 300 free ones you already get. And if you decide to upgrade at any point, you can also use my code PixelArtistry for 60% off your first month on the professional plan. But now let's dive directly what is new in Tripo AI Ultra. So with the new Tripo AI Ultra update, we have now sharper edges and cleaner surface compared to the standard version of Tripo 3.0. We also do have actually fewer geometry artifacts than before. So there's a big reduction, for example, in double layer surfaces and random gaps, and overall the surface flow is much more consistent than before when it comes to the topology, for example. Color and details are now much more accurate than before and really correspond to our original image. And also when it comes to UV and material placement, we now have much more refined textures where we don't see, for example, UV seams that visible than it was before. Also, when it comes to detail, Tripo AI Ultra captures now even very small and fine details in the geometry itself, which leads to high detail overall in our texture and in our geometry shape, which is especially useful because, for example, we can then later on bake our details from our low poly mesh into a high poly one, and I will show you this later on in the video, so make sure to stick around. As a last thing, we have now also optimized PBR shaders, which means that materials now respond more naturally to light, and we have now more balanced and realistic PBR textures overall. Alright, so how can we use Tripo AI Ultra? That's actually quite easy and straightforward. Only thing we need to do is of course log into Tripo, then we are here on the main interface page, and what we need to do then is here clicking on 3D workspace. Once we are then here, we see that we have here our interface, and on the left you might be familiar with that already in case you have used Tripo before. So I will navigate here to one click, and that we also generate directly a texture. Then I will go here to image text to 3D, and then I will upload here my image. And for this example, I'm right now using a iguana model because I really wanted to show you how much detail Tripo AI can actually capture. And here it's a good example because with the iguana it has all those scales like a typical reptile has, and we capture then a lot of detail, which is great, and we can then take it further later on in Blender and stuff. So I think this is great as an example. And once we have uploaded this, only really thing you need to do then is choosing here the Ultra mode. So we can simply select this one, and then you already see it saying here maximum detail for most intricate and realistic models, and it's compared to the standard much more detailed. So we would choose this one, then we choose here the HD texture. We're using topology triangle, and then only thing which is really important is actually that we're leaving the poly count to auto, because otherwise we will reduce our face number or limit our face number, and we don't want that because we want the maximum quality. So actually once we have that, then we can just hit generate here, and then Tripo will start already the generation. Alright, and once generated we can then look at our result, and actually the most difference you you see, compared to the standard version, is not the texture itself. Even though you see the colors are now matching really close to our original image, you can actually see the true detail when you go here to the solid mode. And as you can see, we get now all this crazy fine detail here in our shape, which is really impressive, I gotta say. So this is really cool to see how much detail Tripo AI Ultra can now actually capture. And yeah, I think that's really impressive to compare to the standard version, how much more detail we are now actually getting here. One thing I also notice is that the closer we go in our original image, like a close-up or something, the more detail we can generate. And you can actually see this here as a good example where I took a close-up of this image here, like the head model, and then I only generated the head in Tripo. You can already see like this crazy detail we are getting here. When I now go to the solid mode, you can even see we get like very fine detail, which we usually would find more like in a displacement, for example, or normal map. But this is exactly why I will show you now in a second how to make a displacement and normal map out of it with a decent topology count and a quad topology actually that you can then use later on when you would like to take your model into rigging or animation later on, so that it becomes then really useful and production ready. By the way, as you can see, we get way more detail here, and this is also why I will show you a technique later on in the video, how you can merge then kind of those parts, for example a head or a body or something, with your original model, so that you get even more detail than by merging different body parts together in Blender. But this I will explain you in a second. Besides that, I also tested Tripo Ultra with some other models, so to see how much detail we get, for example also with hard surface models and so on. For example, I also generated this house here, and here we then can also actually see that the texture is matching quite well and it sticks quite good with the original image. When I tumble around here, for example, we can see that we get this fine detail overall, which is cool. And we can also go to the solid mode, where we then also see, yeah, that we get like a solid structure. Of course, we have here still some imperfections in the windows and stuff, which could be definitely still improved, but it's great to know that Tripo, for example, could also handle this kind of assets for background props and so on. And the thing is, Tripo AI Ultra especially stands out for character generation, so I really wanted to also test it out for cartoony characters. So I prompted this boy here, this cartoony boy, in Midjourney, and then I prompted this one as well in Tripo Ultra to see how it's behaving. As you can see, it's doing also a good job. We have here some imperfections, but this we could paint out in the texture tab over here. If you want to learn more about that, you can also check my previous video about Tripo 3.0 to learn about this technique. But anyways, I think this is really cool to see how well it's also behaving here. Also in the solid mode, we get a very decent result with also like small details around his shirt and his shoes and so on. So I think that's pretty cool to see. As a last example, I also generated here a gun to see how it's behaving here. And as you can see here, we also have a lot of fine details, as with all the models in Tripo Ultra, for example. And this is just to show you what you could expand by prompting, for example, or generating here a gun. Also here with the texture, how it's doing that. Of course, it would behave then differently in a 3D editor like Blender, for example, where the metal would then behave differently when we have like proper lighting and everything and so on. It was just important for me to also show you these kind of models, not just characters, so that you can judge for yourself if you like Tripo AI Ultra and if you would like to use it for your own specific needs later on. Alright, so next step is now actually that I'm showing you how you can bake a normal and displacement map from your high poly mesh, and that we're taking this high poly mesh, that we're first going to retopologize it in Tripo AI Ultra to get then a better topology. Then we're going to export both models into Blender, and then I will explain you step by step how you can bake with a few easy steps a displacement and normal map out of it that you can then use for your games, for example, or personal projects, without having this huge vertex count, which we have over here. As you can see, it's over 1 million polygons. So this is a very handy technique to actually refine your 3D models then. So first thing we're gonna do, we're starting here with our iguana model again. So what we will do first is that we actually go in here and we go to the solid mode. And as you can see, this is the high poly one. We will go then here first to export. And once we're here, we will call it just maybe high. And for the format, it doesn't really matter. We can leave it as GAB for now. And then we're going to export. So this is step number 1 to export our high poly mesh. And once it's exported, then we will go to retopologize this mesh that we see over here into a low poly version. And to do that is also quite simple. We will go first to retopology over here on the top. Then we're going to click on it. Then here we will go to choose topology quads. And for the poly count, I will reduce it to something like 10,000 vertices. So something like this here. We could also type it in, and then we go to retopology. And this is all you need to do actually to get your mesh from a high poly mesh into a low one. So actually quite simple. You just need to wait then until it's retopologized. This will only take a few seconds. Alright, and once it's loaded, then you can see it then over here, and you can always check if your mesh is properly retopologized by going here to the wireframe mode and then maybe also taking our solid mode. And actually now you can see that we have all those quads over here instead of the triangles that we had before. So this is great, and what we can do now as well is to go to export, and then we will just call it low instead of high. And then for the format, it's only important that you choose here FBX, because for some reason last time I tried it with GAB it didn't work, or at least I had triangles then. So I will just choose here FBX. It doesn't make any difference. It will still be at the same position, which is important, but we can just export it as an FBX file. And then you go to export, and then actually we are diving into Blender. And once we are on Blender, actually once you have it opened, you will see that we have here an empty scene. So first we are going to delete our cube as always by pressing X and then delete. And then we can actually go to File, Import, and first we are going to import our high poly mesh. So we will choose here GAB, then we're going to our downloads folder, and then we're choosing our file which we just downloaded and named model high. So we will just import this one, and as you can see it's then here and looking good so far, so with all the detail we need. And next thing is then that we're going to File again, Import, and now we're choosing FBX because this time we need to import the low poly mesh which we exported as FBX. So we go to downloads again, choosing then here Spike Lizard Low FBX. Importing this one as well. And once it's here, as you can see, they are now stuck on top, and it's very important that we keep the same position as they have right now, and because the bake will be also position based, so just make sure to not move it around like this or something, just leave it in the position it is right now. And then we're also going to rename both of them, so I will first go with this one and call it something like Iguana Low, and the other one Iguana High, so we can easily see which one is which. And then what we need to do is first to create two modifiers for our low poly mesh. So what we're going to do is we're selecting here Iguana Low, then we're going to modifiers. It doesn't matter if the high poly is activated or not. I just hide it in the viewport right now because then it's easier to follow up what is going on. Then we're going to our modifiers tab over here, then we're choosing modifier, and first we will create a shrink wrap modifier that we have here. You can also always type it in. And the other thing is we need a multi-res, so we will also take this one. Then we will only shift the shrink wrap down below the multi-res because we would need first to shrink wrap it and then apply the multi-res on top of it. And first thing we're going to do then is setting our shrink wrap here. So what we're going to do is we're choosing here project because we want to project our high detail to our low poly mesh. Next thing is then that we're choosing here negative because otherwise we get like crazy spikes and everything, and we really don't want that. And then we can choose here target, and our target will be then our high poly mesh. So we're just using this little picker on the side, then choosing here Iguana High, and then it's actually already applied. And one more thing we need to do is that we're now going to subdivide our mesh that we have over top here. So we can now actually start applying the different subdivisions, because actually on the lowest level, nothing will be projected onto it because we need way more polygons actually to project all the detail from our high poly mesh onto our low poly one. So we will just go here and then we will start projecting. And as you can see, with every subdivision level where we're going to subdivide our low poly mesh, we will add more detail. So we're going to subdivide, Then we're going to subdivide again. And I will do this until we reach like 5 levels in the viewport in total. So let's see, this is 4 and now we have 5. This might take a while because now it's subdividing a lot of polygons. And first things you're gonna notice is that we have the detail here, but of course there are also some spikes popping out and we really don't want that. So what we can do as a quick and easy fix is that you go here to limit, and then we're going to put a value like 0.01 here on the bottom, and this will then remove all the spikes we had before. So this will just limit like the rays that are shooting from each vertice, and this will then fix all our spikes that we had before, which is good of course. And as you can see, we have then all those nice details we had from the high poly mesh onto our low poly one. We can also view this now when I go here into the edit mode. We see that we have still our low topology but all the high details. But now we actually need to bake maps from it. So what we're going to do is first that we're going to apply our shrink wrapper here once everything is working as expected. So we're going here to on the little sign over here and going to apply. And once applied, what we need to do next is before we bake our map is that we're using our levels viewport and choosing this to a value of 1, for example, because Blender actually needs for the baking of the multi-res a difference between the different levels. Let's say like this, between the sculpt and the level of the viewport. So actually it has a kind of difference it can decide from, because when we would choose a level viewport of 5 and also a sculpting level of 5, then we would have no difference at all. And like this, we have a difference between 1 and 5. That's why we do it like this. And then we're going to render, and to bake our map, then we can choose here from EV to cycles. Also important to leave it as CPU to have the bake correctly working, because otherwise it won't work, at least as far as I know. Then we go here to bake from multi-res, choosing this option here because we have a multi-res modifier. And first thing we're going to do is baking a displacement map. So we're choosing here displacement. And then next step we're going to do is that we now actually need to create a displacement map. And this is also very simple and straightforward to do. So we're going to select our mesh, then we're going to drag out a second window over here. And then we're going here to our shader editor, which we have here, and then you will already see the material with all the maps that were exported from TripoAI and generated already automatically for us. Then we will go Shift and A, and then we're typing in here image texture, because this is what we need. And then we're going here to new, and then we just call it something like displacement. Then make sure to choose a higher resolution because we want to have the best detail possible. So you can choose, for example, here a 4K resolution, so 4096 times 4096. Then we need to make sure that we have a 32-bit float map, so we will select this one, and then we can basically already select here new image, and then it will get created. One more important thing before you bake is that you're choosing here the color space from linear rec to non-color, because we don't want to have any color space correction onto our map. We just want to have a raw output, so this is why I'm choosing non-color here. And once you have that, you can just leave it selected, and then it's actually quite easy. You have your model selected. This is also important. And then only thing you need to do is then going here to bake. Then it will start to bake all the high detail into our displacement map now. And this is also very fast. And once we have that, we can then check our displacement map if it worked correctly. So what I will do first is plugging in here the color into surface. And then I can actually first plug in an HDRI really easy. This is just optional. You can also check that with a light, of course. It's just a bit fancier to see actually all the lighting and the displacement if it worked correctly. So we'll just choose my HDR here. Then I will choose this one, for example, say create world nodes. This is, by the way, with the easy HDRI plugin add-on in Blender. So you can download this. I can also put you a link down below in the description if you would like. All right, so first thing is that we're going back to our render view and cycles. And then just to make it more visible that we have now plugged in our displacement map in a second, we are going to disconnect our base color and our normal map. And what I'm going to do then is creating a displacement node that you can do with Shift A. Then you're connecting the color to the height input, because this is what we need. And then we're going to connect the displacement node to the displacement. And as you can see, it's barely visible right now because the scale is quite low. So we will increase the scale to 0.2 or maybe 0.1. And as you can see, we have now way more detail and our displacement is clearly visible without any issues, which is great. And we have this now in our low poly model, which is awesome. In case you would like to get rid of the multi-res, what you could do is, of course, apply it and then just use a subdivision surface modifier with 5 steps. And yeah, this is basically how you bake a displacement map. And now when we have set this up, it's very easy to also bake a normal map out of it. So what we need to do for this is to go in here again in the shader editor, hitting Shift A and then typing in image texture again. Then we're creating a new one, call this normal map. And then we will go with a 4K resolution again. And we don't really need the 32-bit float here, so we will just leave this off and then click on new image. And once we have that, just make sure that you also set this to non-color, the same as the displacement map, so we don't get any artifacts. And once we have that, we can now bake our map by simply going to the render section again, scrolling down and then changing here the type to normal map instead of displacement map, and then hitting bake. And let's do that. And obviously what we need to do is that we first select our model, going again to bake, and as you can see, now it worked. And now we can also first going into render view again and now connecting our normal map. And as you can see, we get this really great detail now in our normal map, which is really cool. And now we could also plug it into the shader directly. So you can directly plug in the normal map over the shader if you want, and to view how it's behaving now. And as you can see, we get now this really nice detail from our normal map on our iguana model. By the way, in case you would like to learn more about AI-powered 3D generation, you can always join our free Pixel Artistry Discord server to connect with like-minded people in our industry, and also make sure to follow our free newsletter FutureFrames to get updated weekly about the latest AI workflows and tools, and especially regarding 3D workflows. So having said that, let's directly continue with the video. One thing I realized is that we can actually even achieve more detail with Tripo Ultra by, for example, generating the head and body separately and then merging them later in Blender together to then achieve a even more high quality result than before. You can see here a good before and after showing how much more detail we get in his face, for example, with this approach. And I will show you now step by step how you can actually achieve the same result. So first we are starting in the TripoAI interface again. And as you can see, I already generated this character here, which is kind of a game character. And we can instantly notice that his body looks great, but the closer we go into his face, we can see that we're missing a bit of detail because it was generated from this view that we see over here. We can also see this when we go to solid mode. And what we can do now is actually that first we will go into our generation tab, and then we're going here to image text to 3D, and we're going to upload again the image that we used to generate our model in the first place. And this was actually this image here. And now we can use the TripoAI editor to generate a close-up of this image over here. And we can then type in something like show a close-up image of his head. And once we have that and shows here Nano Banana, what we can do is then edit image. Nano Banana will then actually generate a close-up of his head, hopefully. Let's see. And then as you can see, Nano Banana did a great job here by generating a close-up of his head. But since we only want to have the head, you have two options. You could either try with Nano Banana now to isolate his head completely. But what I do most of the times, which is even faster, is that I'm going here to save image as, and then I'm saving here my image. And what I will do then is go into Photoshop, and then I can open the image, the close-up that we generated. And I actually generated this close-up before, so we will take this one here, which gave me this look over here. And then what I did is just isolating only his head and getting rid of the other parts, kind of. So I would first choose the subject here, then I will isolate this one. And what I can do now is just doing a quick mask by simply selecting here a mask around him, that we only isolating his neck area, kind of, and cutting out everything else. So like this. And then I'm going Control and J to separate this head part as well. And then we have something like this, and then I could simply just refine it by having some smoother edges over here. Something like this could already work. And then it doesn't need to be perfect by any means. So maybe something like this might already work. And then we could just go here, File, Export, and then just make sure that it's a PNG, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. And then we can just save that here under Tripo AI Ultra again, save it, and then say something like edit head, and then we can upload this to Tripo again. And I did this already, so as you can see, I generated then the head model separately from his body, and we can then actually see that we get way more detail in his head model. So when I'm going here to solid mode, as you can see, we're getting then like a defined eye geometry and the nose and eyebrows and so on, which is really great, and also more detail in his hair and his ears and so on. And next step we are going to do now, once we have that, is that I'm going to export again. Then we're going to export both models again, the head and the body itself. So I will do this quickly. All right, and then we are actually back in Blender, and as you can see, I just imported both models, like our head and the body. I will just quickly rename them to head and body. And then first thing we're going to do is, of course, scaling our head with S and then just shifting it around, so it not like this, so that it matches kind of our original head. Something like this could already work. Maybe do it a bit smaller, because of course it should kind of work scale wise, that it makes sense anatomy wise. So let's see, with an approach like this, it could potentially already work. We just need a rough base, and then we can refine the scale later. Then I'm going to hide our head for now. And what we're going to do is first going into edit mode of our body model, and then I'm going to the face mode over here. And then what we are going to do is simply deleting our head, with the old head that we have over here. So I will also go to the X-ray mode that we have here, so I can make sure that I delete the front and back faces when I select everything. So we can start with this one, for example, to delete then the head. Then we still have a little bit of his head left. You can also delete this one, and then maybe also get rid of his neck area here, kind of, to just make sure that we have enough space. And something like this might work. We have to see how much we need to delete from his neck area, because we will connect this later on, but I rather prefer to have a bit less of his actual neck and then connect it later on with the new mesh that we generated on his head close up. But we could already check maybe how much we have here. So when I go back into X-ray mode, yeah, as you can see, we might need to get rid of his neck completely. So I will do that quickly. All right, and once we have done that, we will now proceed by merging both parts together. So I will blend in our head again. And as you can see, this is already matching quite well. We can still see that we have here a tiny gap between the meshes, but we will fix this in a second. So just be aware of that. And as you can see, his head is now quite large, so we will also downscale this a bit again so that it matches scale wise. Something like this could work already. So just make sure that we find a good balance between both for now. So something like this maybe could work already. And once we have done that, what we can now do is that we're going first into the modifier when we're choosing our body. So we go here, body, then we're choosing here modifier, and then we will use a Boolean modifier to actually then merge our two meshes together. So like this, then we go to union, and then I will choose here my head model. All right, and once we have then our modifier here, the Boolean modifier, it's only important that you choose here the object head, and then we already have it merged as one object. We can also hide our previous head now, and so that we don't have a double up in our mesh. And what we can do now is that we're going here and then apply it first so that they are merged by default. And after we hit apply now, we will actually use a remesh to close this little gap that we see over here between his neck area and his head. Of course, here it's also not refined yet. We could even delete some parts here before merging, but this is more for demonstration purposes, how you could do this with different meshes. So actually what we can do now is that we're going to modifier again, then we're choosing here a remesh modifier like this. And then what I will do is that I first go to smooth, and when we are here we actually because this is obviously too low res so what we need to do is then increase our octree depth. I choose here 12 to bring back all the details that we had before. So something like 12 is a good default value. You could go even higher, but then it becomes very slow. So I would recommend going with 12 or even lower if that's possible for you. Otherwise, I would just recommend to leave it at 12. And then once it's here, as you can see now, which is really great, it closed the gap here around his neck. So we now have a decent line, as well as here, everything is merged now as one mesh back together. And when we blend in our old body and now our new one as a before and after comparison, we can see that we have much more detail now also around his head area and his body area. Of course, we could now take him first, of course, make sure to apply here your remesh if you want to export him again. We could now, for example, export him back into TripoAI to retexture him, or upload him into TripoAI to retexture him there. In case you're curious to learn how that is possible, you can check out my video right here where I explain you step by step how you can retexture your models in TripoAI itself. Alright, I really hope you have enjoyed this video. Tripo is, by the way, also now hosting a rendering competition, and submissions open there on November the 2nd. And there you can win also great prizes and show off your skills. So definitely make sure to check that out in case you're interested. Otherwise, as always, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video in case you have found it useful. And actually see you on the next one.